Yesterday, there were some people who didn't understand how to do the solving quadratic equations, and in order to do that, you needed to understand two previous topics we'd done, which is expanding brackets and factorizing quadratic expressions. So for the benefit of the people who didn't understand, I'm going to go through a few examples. We're going to take it slowly. We're going to do step by step how to do it, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding of the topic. So taking a couple of steps back to expanding brackets, something we've done in class. If we've got this set of double brackets, in order to expand it, we're going to have to first of all times the x by the x, which gets us x squared. We're going to have to multiply the x by the 3, which is going to get us 3x. We're going to have to multiply the 2 by the x, which is going to get us 2x. And we're going to have to multiply the 3 by the 2, which is going to get us 6. A couple of ways you can remember how to do that. Either you remember that these arrows are sort of arranged in a smiley face sort of formation, or you can remember FOIL, so first terms, outer terms, inner terms, last terms, spells out FOIL if you think about those letters. Or you can just remember it's this one times this one, then this one times this one, then that one times that one. And you're always going to get the same sort of thing. But this can be simplified one extra step, because that 3x add 2x in the middle there is going to combine to make 5x. And the point of me doing this is to explain the concept of factorizing expressions. Because normally when you factorize expressions, there's a common factor throughout. But if you have a look at this, you've got your x squared and your 5x. They've both got x's in, so there's a common factor there. But there's no common x term here. There's no common number term. It seems like there's nothing in common. It seems like it can't be factorized. It seems like you can't put in brackets. But it came from brackets, so clearly you can. It's just a different sort of factorization. So when you've got these three terms, an x squared term, an x term, and a number term, it's a quadratic and it's going to go into two brackets. If we have a look at some similarities between them, you can see that 5. How can you make 5 from what numbers you've got here? If you add the 3 and the 2, you get 5. How can you get 6 from these numbers? If you times the 3 and the 2, you get 6. And that's not a coincidence, that's always going to be the case. When you have to factorize a quadratic, you're going to look for two numbers that add up to make the x term and multiply to make the number term. So let's have a practice at a few of those. So the first one. Once you realize that you're asked to factorize it and it's a quadratic factorization, because there's those three terms in that pattern I told you about, and there's nothing in common with them, you know it's going to be two brackets, each with an x in the start, and that's how you start off. Just write those down. Then you've got to figure out two numbers that add up to make 7 and multiply together to make 12. It's easier if you think about the multiplication first. So two numbers that multiply together to make 12, well, it could be 1 and 12, but they don't add to make 7. It could be 2 and 6, but they don't add to make 7. It could be 3 and 4. It is 3 and 4 because they do they do add up to make 7. Plus 3, plus 4. Now, when there's some minuses in there, it's the same starting step because it's a quadratic factorization. You're going to have two brackets with an x in the start of each of them. But you're going to have a slightly different next step. You're going to have to figure out two things that multiply to make minus 14, but add up to make 5. So some people find that a little bit trickier, but to make minus 14, you're going to have to make a minus times a positive. So it's either going to be 1 and minus 14, or minus 1 and 14, or 2 and minus 7, or minus 2 and 7. And you've got to figure out which combination of those add up to make 5. hopefully you realize that it's minus 2 and 7. They add up to make 5, but multiply to make 14. And so they're the answers. You can think about them as the 7 and 2 have a difference of 5. That's one way of making it easier. Another way of doing it is to think about the fact that it's plus 5x in the middle, so the bigger one would have to be plus. But always start off with what multiplies to make this, because there's limited options, but there's loads of ways that things can add up to make 5. So again, we've got another quadratic factorization, so it's going to make the same first step, 2 brackets, x at the start of each of them. Then the next thing we're going to have to do is figure out 2 numbers that multiply to make minus 5 and add up to make minus 4. Start off by thinking what multiplies to make minus 5. It's either going to be 1 and minus 5 or minus 1 and 5. And think about which of those adds up to make minus 4. It's got to be minus 5 and 1. Okay, always start off with what multiplies to make this, and then just add up the different options and see which one gets you what you're looking for in the middle. So 2 numbers that multiply to make 6 and add up to make minus 5. So you might first of all think, well, it's 1 and 6 or 3 and 2. But they're all positive and they're never going to add up to make a minus number. So you've got to think a little bit more about this one and realize that a minus number times a minus number will make a positive result, but they'll still add to give you a negative number. So it's going to be, in this case, minus 3 and minus 2, because they multiply together to make positive 6 and they add up to make negative 5. Okay, so hopefully you understood that. Now, solving quadratic expressions or equations is just 1 step or 2 steps further than this. Okay, depending on what sort of question you got. But this is the hardest part of it. After you've done this part, it's all just following a simple pattern. So I'm going to keep these answers up in the corner, but we're going to solve some equations now. So you've got this first equation, x squared plus 7x plus 12 equals 0. All that's different from the question we had before was we're now told it equals 0. We're going to do the exact same first step, which is to factorize. So when we factorize, we're going to get the exact same thing we did before. If this equals 0, then this will also equal 0. Now what we've got is x plus 3 multiplied by x plus 4, because a bracket next to a bracket means multiply. So this bracket times this bracket equals 0. If you think about any 2 numbers that multiply together to make 0 and write them down, they'll always have something in common. Always one of those numbers will be 0. If I pick 7 times 0, that makes 0. If I pick 12 times 0, that makes 0. If I take minus 5 times 0, that makes 0. As long as one of those numbers is 0, the result will be 0. And if neither of those numbers is 0, the answer will never equal 0. So knowing that, then I've got to realize that either this first bracket, x plus 3 equals 0, or this second bracket, x plus 4 equals 0. It's the only way it can be true. Okay, so hopefully you understood that step, but if you didn't, then just actually do that step. Write out the first bracket equals 0, or the second bracket equals 0. It's always going to be the same step. Then we've got to actually think about what x would have to be to make it true. Something plus 3 equals 0. That something's got to be negative 3. Or something plus 4 equals 0. Well, that something would have to be negative 4. So you've got your 2 answers, x equals negative 3 or x equals negative 4. You might be a little bit confused about it having 2 answers and the fact that it says or in the middle. You might be thinking, well, which one is it? How do I know which one it is? It's actually both of them. Okay, a quadratic equation will have two answers. If we just imagine putting that minus 3 in, minus 3 squared makes 9, plus 7 times minus 3, minus 21, add 12, you get 0. If you put in minus 4, you get 16, take away 28, plus 12, it equals 0. They're both true. Okay, so quadratics will always have two solutions, and they'll always be found in the same way. So next question, if we have a look at that. So it's exact same as before, it just now equals 0. So we're going to do the exact same first step as before, which is to factorize. We already factorized before, and then that equals 0. Then the next step, because this times this equals 0, either this equals 0 or this equals 0, so the next step is going to be the same as well. We're going to write out this bracket equals 0 or this bracket equals 0. And then we're going to figure out what x would have to be to make that true. So either x equals 2 or x would equal minus 7, because 2 take away 2 is 0 and minus 7 plus 7 equals 0. We've got our two solutions. They're both true. If you were to put them back in, you get a result of 0 for both times. Okay, so next one, got a quadratic expression equaling 0, making an equation. First step is to factorize, just like we did before. Next step is going to be to make the brackets equal 0. So either this bracket equals 0 or this bracket equals 0. Then the final step is going to be to figure out what x is. Something take away 5 is 0, has to be 5. Something plus 1 equals 0, has to be negative 1. So x equals 5 or x equals negative 1. Last one, exact same way. First step, factorize, equals 0. Next step, first bracket equals 0 or the second bracket equals 0. And then the last step, work out what x would have to be. Something take away 3 equals 0. So that's either going to be 3, or in this case it would be 2. So x equals 3 or x equals 2. And you got two answers each time. Let's just check those ones work. 3 squared is 9. Take away 15, add 6. Yes, that's 0. 2 squared is 4. Take away 10, add 6. Yes, that's 0. Okay, so there's one slight thing they could do differently, and they do in the exercise, and that is starting with something where it's not equal to 0. But luckily it's just one extra step. So if we look at this question, x squared plus 3x equals 28. It doesn't equal 0 anymore. So what have we got to do? What we've got to do is we've got to change it so that it does equal 0. I don't want to equal 28, I want to equal 0. So how do I get rid of that 28? I take it away. So if you take away 28, you're going to get 0 on this side. But I've got to be fair, I've got to take away 28 from each side. I haven't got any number terms here to take away 28 from, so it just becomes a minus 28 on that side. I had some number, let's say 40 plus 40 there, I'd take away 28 and get 12. But I didn't have any numbers, so I take it away and it becomes a minus 28. Now it's exactly like the questions before. It's a quadratic expression equaling 0 to make an equation, and your first step is going to be to factorize. I haven't got the factorizations in the corner anymore because it's a new question. So I've got to remember how to do that. Two brackets, each one with an x at the start. Then I've got to think about two numbers that multiply together to make minus 28 and add up to make 3. So we start off by thinking what multiplies to make minus 28. 1 and minus 28? Or minus 1 and 28? No, neither of those add up to make 3. 2 and 40, minus 14, or minus 2 and 14, they don't add to make 3. 4 and minus 7, or minus 4 and 7. Minus 4 and 7, they add up to make 3. So once you've got it factorized, either this bracket equals 0 or this bracket equals 0, because two things times together are equaling 0 one of those things has to be true. Then I've got to figure out what x is. So something take away 4 is 0. Well, it's got to be 4. Something plus 7 equals 0. It's got to be minus 7. Because 4 take away 4 is 0. And minus 7 plus 7 equals 0. And you can check them in your original equation. 4 squared plus 3 times 4, so 16 plus 12. Yep, that's 28. Minus 7. So minus 7 squared is 49. Take away 21. Yes, that's 28. So they're both correct solutions. Okay, so hopefully you now understand enough to have a go at the exercise again, because I want you to have a go at the same exercise again if you didn't understand question 3. And what I'm going to also do is show you where you can get some extra help. So you can get some extra help on MyMaths. So if you log on to MyMaths, then let's just think about it. So you've logged in. If you click on algebra, then there's help for everything here. So algebraic manipulation, where it starts off, you got your factorizing quadratics. If you didn't understand that, click on here, you click on the lesson, and it takes you through the whole thing. Okay, it takes you through everything I've gone through, but in extra steps with little questions you have to check along the way. Okay, so all of the things I've done, it'll take you through it interactively. Okay, if you get that but you don't get the solving equations, so I'm going to click here, equations quadratic, and again the first one, click on the lesson, and it's going to take you through everything that we have done. So all the things I've done today plus more, you've got some extra help there. Or ask in the chat if you need some extra help. Okay, hopefully this has been useful for the people that haven't remembered from before half term how to factorize expressions, and hopefully now if you give it another go you can begin to understand solving quadratics, and also it'll strengthen your ability to factorize. Okay, so that's everything for today.